Welcome to the screencast for The Ghost in the Machine by Gilbert Ryle. You'll find this article on page 133 in our textbook. Gilbert Ryle's that stern-looking man in the bottom left, and in the top left you see an image that illustrates one of the kind of intuitive ways people think about how the mind directs the body, as kind of a little man inside deciding everything that we do, say, think, and feel. So some background. With this article, we began a new unit. We looked at introductory sorts of articles. We looked at some articles that dealt with epistemology or knowledge and with reasoning. And now we're going to look at a few articles in a field called philosophy of mind. Philosophy of mind touches not on just one of the major branches of philosophy. It looks at epistemology, metaphysics, and even moral theory. So when we think about what our mind does and our consciousness, we think about how we get knowledge, we think about the way our bodies and brains actually interact materially, and we think about what it is that makes people good or bad. So one of the things we're going to take a look at is one of the central issues in philosophy of mind, and we've seen it repeatedly raised directly and indirectly, the mind-body problem. Of course, it also studies the nature of consciousness, the nature of mental properties, states, and events, and a lot of contemporary philosophers of mind partner with cognitive scientists, to study the sciences of the mind using reason. Gilbert Ryle wrote this article in the mid-20th century, almost exactly. It says 1949 it was published. And this was around the time of the rise of contemporary philosophy of mind. So the mind-body problem itself is an issue within metaphysics. Remember that metaphysics investigates the nature of the outside world. Epistemology, or the study of knowledge, is concerned only with what's inside of our mind. But metaphysics, on the other hand, wants to know how the way the actual world itself is structured. And you might think, well, that's the purview of science. They study the way the world actually is. But there are some problems that don't seem like they're easily accessible to observation. And that's where a lot of the philosophy of mind comes in, and where the mind-body problem arises. So it seems like whenever we start to think about our minds, it's intuitive to most people to say that minds are vastly different than regular ordinary matter. And when we say bodies, that's what we mean. Ordinary matter in three-dimensional space. It has a length, width, and a height. You can break it up and look inside of it. You can figure out all the mechanics of it using observation like scientists do. So we can illustrate this difference by thinking about an example. You can imagine a neuroscience in the future, doesn't matter how far, that has advanced far enough that it can map every single neuron in a human brain. All of the trillions or billions, I don't know how many are in there. We know that the brain is made up of matter that we can study. We can take a slice of it and look at it under a microscope and see that it's made up of molecules and atoms. That's matter. So this advanced neuroscience can map every single connection. But now you imagine that it can do this without killing someone. You put them in a machine and you can see all of the neurons firing at all times. We still would not be able to directly and empirically observe the contents of the mind. We wouldn't be able to see that person's feelings, thoughts, memories, dreams, or the images that you might imagine when you're going about your conscious life. There's something there that we can't directly observe. So it seems like, on this example, that the mind is something distinctly different to ordinary matter, or body. So this has led to many abstract theories about what the mind actually is in the world, the metaphysics of the mind, and why it's separate from the material world. In our article, the first section that you read by Ryle is called The Official Doctrine. And he's explaining this quote-unquote received wisdom about the mind-body split. This is not his own viewpoint. He's explaining the mainstream way of seeing the differences between the mind and the body. We've gotten this all the way back in Descartes, and Descartes ended up being the gold standard for how people looked at the mind-body split for hundreds of years. We'll see the roots of the mind-body split when we take a look at the second meditation in a couple of modules. So the received wisdom is we are made up of two things. We're made up of a body and a mind. The mind that you can think of as spiritual or as soul, or you can just think of it as some immaterial substance that inhabits our bodies. We don't necessarily know how the mind and the body are connected, but we do know that it seems like we need a brain to have a mind, even if they're different substances. Another way to think about this is in many religions, the mind or the spirit or the soul can continue on after death. So that means it must be something separate to the material body entirely. Now, if you really think this, that the mind and body are two separate entities, and that the mind isn't made of matter at all, it's going to have consequences. Bodies are in space and are in time. So they're subject to the laws of physics and matter. Minds are not in space. I made a mistake there. They are in time because they're coupled with us somehow, coupled with the body. But they can't be made of matter, so they can't have three dimensions. And they have to be subject to their own laws. So a lot of philosophers in the Western tradition have spent their efforts classifying the separate rules in the mental realm. So in the syllabus, we looked at how philosophy traditionally tries to gather knowledge using reason alone. Reason is a rule in the mental realm, because when we give reasons, we're doing it using our minds. One way that we try and think of the differences between the mental world and the physical world is that we say the mind is classified as internal to someone. It's not accessible like the external world is. Bodies are considered external. You see something at the bottom here, if you skip to the bottom of the slide. There's a problem with this, of course, because inner, outer, external, internal, you have to be in space for those classifications to mean anything. If something is immaterial and it's outside of space, there is no such thing as inner or outer. That's a conception of something that's firmly rooted in three-dimensional space. Okay, so one realm, the mind, has difficulty accessing the other, the body, and vice versa. You have direct access to your own thoughts and feelings just by being alive. Your will, what you want, and your desires and your wishes. No one else can ever experience those things directly. You can tell them about it in the world of space, but they can't go inside your mind and feel your feelings. Mind seems inaccessible from the outside world, where everything made up of matter is accessible by everyone, theoretically, obviously. We can't get to the other end of the universe practically, but if you're a materialist, you think that it is theoretically possible to access all of space. So now it seems here we have the crux of the problem. The mind and the body have split. And if the mind isn't made up of matter, what is it made up of? The official doctrine has issues in knowing that we can use our minds to direct our actions in the physical world. And if mind is completely immaterial, we need an explanation for that. Descartes and others have answers, but Ryle is just pointing to the issue that we have when we say one issue that we have when we say that the mind and the body are different fundamentally. This is a long quote from page 135 in the end of the section called The Official Doctrine. And again, Ryle is telling us what the official doctrine is, not that he agrees with it. He's going to present an argument right after this to show how he thinks the official doctrine is incorrect. But the long quote here is, "There is thus a polar opposition between mind and matter, an opposition which is often brought out as follows. Material objects are situated in a common field known as space, and what happens to one body in one part of space is mechanically connected with what happens to other bodies in other parts of space. But mental happenings occur in insulated fields known as minds, and there is, apart from maybe telepathy, no direct causal connection between what happens in one mind and what happens in another. Only through the medium of the public physical world can the mind of one person make a difference in the mind of another." But Ryle thinks this is a mistake. So the absurdity of the official doctrine starts on page 135, and he uses a metaphor to explain it. He calls the mistake a category mistake. The categories in question are logical categories. So you can think we categorize everything. We use a taxonomy to explain different levels of organization. On the right there, I have the classification in the animal kingdom, at least the traditional one: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And if you took a species name and mixed it up with a phylum name, you'd be making a logical mistake. You'd be thinking that something that belongs to a group is actually the part of the group name itself. So just like any categorization, we think of there being wholes, and we think of those wholes as having parts. Like my body or any human body is a whole, while every human body has limbs and organs, which are parts. Also, our entire body has molecules and cells, which are parts. So this would be like thinking that a cell belonged to the category of whole body. If that's confusing, we'll take a look at the actual specific example. He calls this the ghost in the machine, this received official theory, and that's the category mistake that you're making. How we think of our bodies as the machine and the soul or spirit or mind as the ghost that somehow floats around as a part of the physical body. He thinks that the mind is not a separate category inside of us, but instead it is the whole of the person, as all of our bodily functions united. So he asks you to imagine a visitor from far away who's never seen Oxford University in England. He was an English philosopher. And there's a tour guide, and he shows the visitor around the campus. They visit libraries, sports fields, classrooms, museum, administration offices, every different type of building and space on the campus. But at the end of the tour guide says, "Okay, well, how did you like it?" And the visitor says, "Well, but where is the university?" So the visitor then has made a category mistake. So the visitor's thinking that the university is a separate building. It's a part to the whole, instead of understanding that the university is the whole itself. The individual pieces come together to make the whole. You see my illustration over there. There's the commons, the science building, the classroom, the offices, and at the end, the visitor is wondering where the university is. So in the same way, our bodies and brains have bits and pieces that add up to become mind, and mind is not a separate piece of the puzzle. Thus, the long-standing mind-body split is a logical illusion. Ryle has some other examples of category mistakes, and I want you to think about whether or not you agree with him that the body-mind split is an illusion. I'll give you one other one. So, oftentimes when a military unit or a sports team work well together, they say they have esprit de corps, or they work well together. And if someone asked where the last player or the last soldier was who embodied esprit de corps or teamwork, you would realize that they made a sort of category mistake, that it's the team working together in unison that becomes the esprit de corps, and it's not a separate piece in the entire whole.